Hey there, friend. One of the most dangerous things inside any organization for leaders like you and me is not incompetence or groupthink, if you happen to listen to episode 519, although that's certainly a concern, or even a lack of clear vision for the future. It is categories. That's right. I said it. It's categories, because the way that we organize the world, how we label things, how we classify things, how we divide and conquer these responsibilities that we face every single day as individuals and as an organization, ultimately these determine what we see and what we miss. And that's the core idea behind Gillian Tett's fascinating book, The Silo Effect. Now, Gillian Tett is a journalist and a trained anthropologist. But before that word scares anyone off, anthropology is really just the study about how humans organize themselves, how groups form, how people communicate, and how shared habits and assumptions shape behavior. In other words, anthropologists study culture, and culture is really a collection of behaviors. So anthropology ultimately explains why silos naturally emerge. That's right. They're natural. We should anticipate them. And if we predict them well, we can understand the pros and cons of silos and expertise. And almost every single organization of any reasonable size has at least one. Every construction company has unwritten rules about how decisions get made, how information flows, and how different groups, estimating and operations, the field, and certainly the C-suite, how they see the world differently. And Tett argues that many of the biggest failures in business and government happen not because people are careless, but because they're trapped inside organizational silos that shape how they interpret reality. That is, they have categorized things differently, and often they have misunderstood risk because of the categories they've created and they rely upon. And once you see it, you realize silos aren't just an organizational problem. They're a human problem. Now, in my experience working for a very large building company and working as a consultant over the last 15 years, I find this understanding of silos so important. I included it in my University of Oklahoma leadership class for construction professionals. We built and I wrote an entire case study around a fictional construction company we called, fairly on the nose, yes, Silo, just to show how these invisible structures shape decisions and the future of our organizations. So by the end of this episode, my friend, you will start to see silos inside your own organization, and more importantly, how leaders like you can break through them. Welcome to the Construction Leadership Podcast, where we help construction executives lead high-performing teams that finish on time and under budget without all the firefighting and babysitting, so you can lead with focus and control. I am your host, Bradley Hartman. Another anthropologist named Robin Dunbar famously suggested that humans can only maintain meaningful relationships with about 150 people. And that's why organizations naturally break into smaller teams or divisions. It improves trust, speeds communication, and increases accountability. And if you think about those things, trust, good. Clarity of communication, sure, that's nice. Accountability, who doesn't want that? These are all good things. Every leader wants those, but there's a trade-off. Those same tight-knit groups that work well internally can become isolated from the rest of the organization. In other words, the very thing that helps teams function the best can also create silos. And in the silo effect, Tett's argument isn't that silos should disappear. It's that leaders must do two things. One, recognize that silos are somewhat inevitable. And number two, build bridges between them. Because the danger isn't specialization. The danger is specialization without cross-communication. And this is exactly why the subtitle of The Silo Effect is The Peril of Expertise and the Promise of Breaking Down Barriers. And let me paint an illustration for you. So imagine a small construction company. Say you got 15 people in estimating, you got about 50 in operations, you got another dozen in purchasing, and you got 6 or 7 safety people. Each group is tight-knit. They trust each other. They share assumptions about how the world, and specifically your organization, works. But each group also sees the project and their job through a different lens. Why? Because they're all looking out for their area of expertise. They're all looking out for the things that influence their incentives. And because they're all human beings, they're all looking out for their own personal self-interest. Or let me give you another one off the top of my head. Maybe there's a building materials company that makes and distributes its own products. And maybe some are pure commodities like 2x4s and 2x6s, and others that are innovative and unique, carrying their own sub-brand and registered trademarks and that cool little R with a circle around it that you got to pay for. Well, how you communicate and sell those commodities is probably different than the specialty products, and those responsible for distribution, they all see the world of construction through a completely different lens. They have a completely different perspective. And if leaders like you and me do not connect those perspectives, the problems fall into the gaps. And that's the silo effect. Gillian Tett writes, "This book started during the great financial crisis of 2008, but it is not a book about finance. Far from it. Instead, it asks a basic question. Why do humans working in modern institutions collectively act in ways that sometimes seem stupid? Why do normally clever people fail to see risks and opportunities that are subsequently blindingly obvious? Why, as Daniel Kahneman, the psychologist, put it, are we sometimes so blind to see our own blindness?" And the crucial point to note is that the word silo does not just refer to a physical structure or organization, such as a department. It can also be a state of mind. Silos exist in structures, but they exist in our minds and social groups too. Silos breed tribalism, but they can also go hand in hand with tunnel vision. Silos help us tidy up the world, classify and arrange our lives, economies, and institutions. They encourage accountability. But silos can also sometimes cause damage. People who are organized into specialist teams can end up fighting with each other, wasting resources. Isolated departments or teams of experts may fail to communicate and thus overlook dangerous and costly risks. Fragmentation can create information bottlenecks and stifle innovation. Above all else, silos can create tunnel vision, or mental blindness, which causes people to do stupid things. Now, before we go any further, if you remember nothing else, I want you to remember these two. First, silos breed tribalism. When groups inside an organization become isolated, people naturally start identifying with their tribe. And surely you've seen this. Estimating versus operations, the field versus the office, purchasing versus, well, just about everybody else. And once tribalism starts, information stops flowing. So the first one, silos breed tribalism. The second one is our taxonomies are our culture. Now, I realize I already threw anthropology at you, which is a word you kind of knew but probably didn't know, at least I'm speaking for myself. That's what I thought. Now, taxonomy is just a fancy word for how we categorize things, how we label work, departments, responsibilities, and I would argue, most importantly, risk. But these categories also shape how we think, and how we think shapes our behavior. And over time, behavior is culture. So when we talk about culture inside an organization, we're really talking about the patterns of behavior that emerge from how we organize and we have chosen to classify our world. Now, if you're curious about the big idea of this book, it's this. Human beings naturally classify the world into categories. And you know we do this, but why? Well, our pointy little heads can only absorb so much information, and there's a lot of stuff going on pretty much everywhere. So we do when we have an overwhelmingly large amount of stuff. We put it into chunks. We put it into buckets. We divide and conquer. And in general, this is smart. This is how our brains simplify complexity. And anthropologists have been studying this for decades. And one thinker that Tett recognized, who I've never heard of, his name is Pierre Bourdieu. And he studied how societies create systems of classification, ways of organizing knowledge that shape behavior. We're going to come back to Pierre Bourdieu because I've dug into his stuff, and a lot of it is dense and, quite frankly, incomprehensible, at least to this pointy little head of mine. However, he's got a few big ideas that I'm going to touch upon in an episode next week. And why Pierre Bourdieu is worth understanding is that when he's talking about these classifications become invisible assumptions. They become our theory of the business, how the world works, how our customers get value, how we deliver value internally, how we organize ourselves internally to deliver the most value externally, and how we all become happy and grow rich, something like that. But once people are inside the system, they stop questioning it. They simply operate from day to day, and it just becomes how we do business here. One of the most fascinating examples in the book comes from the 2008 financial crisis, and this story was around the international bank, UBS. And the S in UBS stands for Switzerland. And all you really need to know is that historically, going back centuries, Switzerland has been known for two related things. Number one, being neutral. They don't get in any world wars. Why would they? Because of banking. Because they had a lot of money. And if they have a lot of money from a lot of different people and these people start to go with war with each other, they've got a problem. So they stay neutral. So part of the DNA, the cultural integrity of being Swiss comes from being good with money. And therefore, UBS really took risk and not losing money very seriously. And to that point, they had over 3,000 risk managers, 3,000 people whose job was to monitor risk. And yet, the bank accumulated tens of billions of dollars of dangerous exposure to subprime loans. How on earth did this happen? They have 3,000 people that wake up every day to say, man, where the hell is the risk? Where's the worst case scenario and how do I find it? And maybe you're thinking, I don't know, maybe they found 3,000 nitwits and a bunch of dumbasses to be these risk managers. I don't think so. It came down to classification. Inside UBS, certain mortgage securities were categorized in ways that made them seem harmless. People who were involved in storing up all this risk to the subprime loans would say things like, oh, no. We don't warehouse the risk. We just transport it. It's just passing through. So even though it looks like we have $60 billion of risk on our balance sheet, we don't. It's not really there. Don't worry. It's going to be gone momentarily. And this sort of language implied that the bank was not actually holding the risk. They were just passing it along, risk-free, and taking a small cut. So internally at UBS, those billions of dollars that were sitting on their balance sheet were simply treated as something labeled, quote-unquote, banking, other. In other words, don't even look here, nothing to worry about, you don't understand it, don't even get me started on derivatives. You, my little Swiss friend, will never understand. And because this classification, these risk managers were told, has no risk, they ignored it. They didn't even flag it. And this is where Gillian Tett's anthropology background becomes interesting and relevant. Anthropologists have long studied how cultures organize knowledge. And the key insight is this: categories are not neutral. They shape perception. And if something sits inside the wrong category, people just don't see it. And Pierre Bourdieu talked about this in terms of social structures shaping perception. Let me repeat that. Social structures, how people organize themselves, shape perception. They shape what we see, how we see it, and what we identify it as. And the structure becomes so normal that people inside it do not even realize it exists. Whether we're thinking about departments or reporting structures or job titles, these all create a mental map. And those maps determine what problems get attention, who talks to whom, what risks get noticed, and who gets rewarded and how. However, it's important to keep in mind that when we have experts and we have teams that have a unique expertise, we should anticipate silos, and silos inherently aren't bad. Every organization needs specialization. You need a finance department. You want a dedicated ops team. You need a tight, cohesive group of project managers. But the problem happens when these structures build their own invisible assumptions and stop communicating with other departments, and everyone stops challenging these assumptions. And here's a few questions that leaders can start asking. Now, I should note here, as a consultant to construction companies, this is part of the value that I and my team can bring. We don't understand these assumptions. We come in and we ask the most basic of questions, understanding the categories, understanding the titles, understanding status, understanding comp. That really helps us understand how this little world works. By pointing out the structure they have created for themselves, we can begin to understand and how to bridge any gaps. Here are some questions that I like to ask, and you as leaders can begin to ask immediately. Now, what category are we putting this problem into? And about this problem, who do we believe is actually responsible for seeing it and addressing it? Is there a bigger picture here? Could there be unintended consequences of addressing this problem without understanding how it affects other departments? Now, in construction, we see this all the time. This might be estimating versus operations, or business development versus project management, or purchasing versus, well, everybody else. Each group sees the world through a different lens. And if nobody connects the lenses, important information never gets combined. And sometimes more important is that misinformation never gets corrected. Now, one of the easiest ways to cut through all this BS is to make sure we don't lose track of one important thing: the customer. We got to remember Dr. Peter Drucker's famous line that the number one job of a firm is to make a customer. And Gillian Tett, near the end of the book, shares a great story about the Cleveland Clinic. And she tells a story of one Dr. Toby Cosgrove and how he went about eliminating some of the silos at the Cleveland Clinic. On paper, Cosgrove knew that Cleveland Clinic was an excellent medical center, or at least it was if you looked at it using the type of mental map that doctors used. There were world-class surgeons, physicians, nurses, psychologists, and physiotherapists. There were divisions of anesthesiology, pediatrics, medicine, surgery, pathology, and laboratory medicine, post-acute care, regional medical practice, nursing, and education, to name but a few of the specialist teams. But was this what sick people really wanted? Was it the best, most effective, or cheapest way to do medicine? Cosgrove was starting to have doubts. Doctors visualize medicine as a collection of technical skills. Patients do not. When people were sick, they did not say, "I need a cardiothoracic surgeon," or "take me to a cardiologist." Instead, they would declare, "My chest hurts," or "I'm having a seizure," or "I can't breathe," or "My stomach is in pain," or simply, "I feel unwell." Now, if you, like me, have ever been involved in one aspect or more of our medical community and found that it's kind of annoying, I have to wait around a long time, or I don't think it's super efficient, or it doesn't really treat me as a unique customer who has needs. And that's because for most of them, it's not about you. It's about them. They've built their silos and their own specialties, and don't even get me started on insurance, but all of them work together to take care of their needs and their understanding and their assumptions about how the world works, not to mention status and hierarchy. So what seems like the most obvious thing in the world to Dr. Toby Cosgrove, to really build their entire medical business at the Cleveland Clinic around the patient? Crazy idea. Maybe we should do the same. So in these large organizations where we look at distribution and we look at project management and we looked at product innovation over here, we start to lose fact that we're only here to serve a customer. And how do we build our own silos? Because silos are okay. It's the recognition that there is expertise and specialties, and we can't just have 1,000 people all working in some giant tilt-up Amazon-style warehouse. That doesn't work either. We need to divide and chunk, but how do we bridge that? That ultimately is the question. And this is what I believe makes The Silo Effect such a great book, is that it helps you see something that's normally invisible. And once you read it, I believe you're going to start seeing silos everywhere, inside your own company, inside the government, even, maybe, inside your own thinking. Because the biggest lesson is this: how we categorize the world determines how we understand it. And sometimes the biggest risks hide in the places our categories tell us not to look. So as we close out here, I want you to remember those 2 lines that I started with at the beginning. Silos breed tribalism, and tribes aren't bad. They're naturally what human beings do, but it's a risk. And it's our taxonomies that become our culture. Taxonomies refer to categories, and culture refers to behavior. It's what are these behaviors that we come to understand and accept and reinforce. Because the way we categorize the world shapes how we think. So what this means for leaders like you and I is if we want to change culture, we have to start by taking a step back and understanding how problems and our organization are classified. What are these assumptions? Can we take a step back and look to where these silos already are and begin there? Because silos aren't just a management problem, they're a human problem. Our brains naturally form tribes, categories, and groups. And leadership, it's not about eliminating silos, it's about connecting them. The book is called The Silo Effect: The Peril of Expertise and the Promise of Breaking Down Barriers by Gillian Tett. That's all I've got. Thanks for listening. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.